right, welcome everyone to another episode of the SpectrumCast, our data resilience podcast having to do with all things in protecting your information, protecting your data. Joined as always by my co-host, Randy Arsenal. Hey, Randy.
Hey.
And our subject matter experts, Tricia Jang and Sean Sperry. Hey, guys.
Yeah, with the royal wave, impressive.
That's
nice.
Right. Get the royal wave down.
Welcome home.
So this week we thought we would talk a little bit about the fact that we've been thinking a lot in the data protection portfolio about capabilities that we offer and that we don't offer. And I think every vendor goes through this that offers protection to its customers. Now, not every vendor is funded to the maximum capacity as possible to go ahead and build all of these sets of capabilities. So what ends up having to happen is you have to partner for a lot of them, or for at least some of them. And IBM is working on some key partnerships with a number of technology vendors that integrate with its Spectrum Protect and its Spectrum Protect Plus products in order to be able to fulfill a lot of the needs that our clients are asking for. What we thought we would do is in subsequent episodes, we'll go into specifics about each particular partner, maybe even bring the partner on to talk a little bit about their technology. But at first, what I'd like to do is maybe pass it to Sean and Tricia. You guys deal with clients all the time, and you see requests for everything under the sun. I have to believe this is a pretty decent strategy, no?
Oh, absolutely. And if you remember last week, we talked about the NetApp and how we have like IMAGs to help back up these large file systems. So there's a whole very, very, very rich culture of third-party products out there that work with Spectrum Protect. And the cool thing is because Spectrum Protect has that DB2 database underneath, it has the open APIs, the S3 APIs, we can really facilitate these companies using our data and our metadata in very unique ways that meet these niche, and sometimes not even niche, but ways that are fantastic and really needed out there.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's an argument to be made that there are some specific needs that you can say, well, not everyone needs them, right? And so a good strategy there is to let a business partner who perhaps can be more focused and more detailed work on that particular need and offer it to our customer base. And as Tricia said, that's been going on in Spectrum Protect for the last 25 years, right? We have a rich ecosystem of partners that partner with us and fill specific niches. I guess the complaint that I hear most of the time is, well, it costs extra, right? And I mean, it's a plus and a minus, right? It's a plus in that if you don't use it, you don't have to pay for it, right? So that's a good thing, right? And it's a minus because a lot of the customers that we deal with want to write one PO to cover everything, right? They want to get their support from one place.
One throat to choke, right?
Yes.
I mean, I'm old enough to remember when, ecosystem alignment used to be called buy versus build. So it was like you had to make the analysis and do the financial calculus and the kind of marketing assessment to understand, well, okay, we can either devote internal resources and time and energy and cost and capital to developing these, or we can go partner with someone who has a solution that's adjacent and, collaboratively work with them to deliver something to the market that fulfills customer needs. So, that hasn't changed. The new ecosystem strategies are a little different and sometimes farther reaching and more comprehensive, I guess. But yeah, I mean, the fact that we have an open platform, as Tricia explained, it's a pretty obvious thing to do to make that available for other value-added partners to build services on top of it. And it makes sense for us, it makes sense for clients, and it makes sense for the partners as well.
Yeah, and I think we brought up a number of key things. First thing, maybe to address, Tricia, you talked about open APIs. I find a lot of the newer technologies like Spectrum Protect Plus is kind of built all around that openness, that open APIs to be able to interact and connect with other applications to do exactly that, to add some components of value add. We've done a lot of work on the Protect side to be able to take capabilities inside of Protect and kind of be able to open them up, provide things like SDKs and APIs to develop to. So I think that that's a key thing and a key thing to note, that we're taking the time to be able to do that, because we're noticing there's a host of set of capabilities that everybody wants to deploy, and people might deploy a similar kind of technology. A bunch of different customers might want to be able to do that, but maybe they want to do it in a different way. And maybe different vendors offer different ways to be able to do very similar things. So by having this openness and this open set of capabilities, you have the ability to do that. Sean, you brought up cost, which is always interesting, and I like the way you positioned it. Right, if you don't need it, you don't have to buy it, and hence you have a hopefully a lower cost product. But if you do need it, right, you do need to buy it. And some people are like, which leads to, one of the things we're doing with these partnerships is we're actually putting them in the IBM price book, right? So that a seller can deliver, whether it's a business partner or an IBM sales rep, can deliver that solution on one piece of paper, Randy, as how you put it, because they can then get that one throat to choke. Sure, so you got to pay a little bit more for the extra added set of capabilities and features, but the flip side is, again, like you said, if you don't need them, you're not paying for them. So I think that's pretty good. What do you think is the most important thing to think about when looking at, from a client's perspective, when looking at other things that I might need for my environment?
If you're a new user, then once you get in and start using Spectrum Protect, check out some of the things that do come with our product. For instance, the reporting we have built into the Operations Center, or the monitoring. And then if you find that, I need that extra bit of reporting, extra bit of monitoring, I need a specific device, then you can start looking at the third-party products that are out there. But take a look at what's already built in, because there is quite a bit already there. And then if you need those extra bells and whistles or those extra support, that's when you would take the next step.
Reporting is one of the classic examples, right? It's, Spectrum Protect for years has had many third-party reporting products, which were just, they are so comprehensive, it almost makes my head spin. I used to be the reports administrator, right? And the product I worked on had 20 binders of reports, and there was always somebody who marched into my office and couldn't find the report they wanted. In that 20 binders full of reports, and wanted me to write one for them, right? So I think, as Tricia said with reports, that's the classic example. To me, a lot of what you need is already there in Spectrum Protect, but there are people that want to take it to that next level. And, for them, the partner route is a good way to go. And it kind of helps define the cost of those extra features for a company, so they can decide, and maybe the people who's asking for that particular feature can decide, is this really worth what it costs to add to the product, right?
Well, there's another area where we see this come into play is when we have RFIs being filled out and you get this request for a very specific database backup or something. And I just encourage our sellers to don't just say, oh, it's not on the IBM website. Do a quick Google, because you might be surprised at the number of third-party solutions that are out there that do support that specific RFI line item that might not be in the generic product.
Yeah, and I've got to believe there's also probably some like industry specific or industry aligned requirements that are maybe not part of the, basic product, that maybe some, boutique provider or consultancy or developer has put together something to fit that requirement that layers on top of Protect, for instance. So I'm sure there's lots of examples of that, given the diversity of whether it's compliance requirements or data retention policies or whatever, that there's probably different industry specific requirements and more vertically focused solutions, which is the case with everything, but certainly with data protection.
Yeah, and then we have things like bare metal restore, where we have some very basic BRMS built in, but then we have partners like Christy, who I'm sure we'll have on this call, who can offer this fabulous solution, which is built directly and integrates directly in with our backups. And so that just is a icing on the cake type of solution.
And I like where you went with that too, Randy, about the industry specifics, right? I mean, we try to architect our product as a great foundational data protection solution. We all know everybody in the world needs backup. Doesn't matter what you're protecting or what vertical you're in, right? You need something, but some applications and some industry verticals need certain things, right? And as a business, right, all vendors across the marketplace have to kind of look and see what's the value proposition. And yet you take some companies that are just very specific about doing things like, I'll pick one, like Epic-based backup for the healthcare industry, right? So it would stand to reason that would be something beneficial for folks to partner with, right? SAP is another one of those. Big database, used a lot, but has its own complexities built in. But that's why people like it, because it can do certain things that other databases can't. So that's another great partnership type of strategy in some cases. Now, in both those particular cases, our products have been around long enough. We actually cover those, but those are some good examples.
Well, and frankly, the flip side of that is there's always going to be competitive opportunities or competitive threats from other solutions that we want to try to confront, and we may be able to do so more quickly by partnering with an existing solution and taking something to market that provides that competitive barrier to entry or that competitive threat prevention faster than we could do it with our own development resources.
That's a good point. That's a very good point. So, this actually has me thinking about, when vendors build out data protection solutions, right? They build it for as many different sets of capabilities as they can, many different platforms, virtual platforms. Now we have container-based platforms, physical systems. But there's even more than that. There's power systems, there's mainframe systems, there's I systems. Tricia, you had a very interesting kind of tooltip this week.
Tooltip time.
Take it away, Tricia.
So this is actually a perfect lead into something I'm busy working on and hope to have out on the web next week, is an example of I Series. And for a long time, we've had these requests to be able to integrate IBM I with Spectrum Protect. And a long time ago, we actually had an API that supported that, kind of went out of favor, got dropped. But now with our new S3 API, where we can utilize Spectrum Protect and receive any type of S3 data, we've opened it up again for the IBM I. And so I'm working on a video that's going to show you how you can either send the BRMS backups to Spectrum Protect directory or cloud container storage pools. And BMRS will actually manage these, expire off the data. Or you can just send a copy of the IBM I file system data to Spectrum Protect if you wanted to keep a second copy out there. So it's just another great example of how these Spectrum Protect APIs really allow us to integrate with all types of applications, platforms.
And there was much rejoicing in the cult of System I.
Well, I was going to say, because Steve laughed at us when we started talking about IBM I and said, oh, it was dead, right? And my response to that was, that's a perfect example of one of those things that's either very important to you or you don't care about it at all, right?
Or you don't know it exists.
Or you don't even know it exists. And there are many, many, many people around the world who count on System I, and many large businesses, and it's still a very viable product, right?
Well, and I've met, every time I meet these systems, and the typical, well, maybe not the typical, but many of them, these are not like mom and pop auto parts. I mean, these are global 100.
These are countries
that are
countries
and government agencies, right, that are running their absolutely most mission critical workloads on System I. So it's legit.
Like, well, I'm putting together the video just on a short demo, but I know our demo center in Montpellier actually has an entire demo to show these critical companies and countries, or whoever's trying to use the IBM I, how they can integrate with Spectrum Protect using S3.
Cool.
Yeah, Sean, I don't know how excited I am about you saying that I didn't care about IBM I. I mean,
Steve loves IBM I. I've seen him in action. He's a big fanboy.
But I think we've made an excellent point here, right? Either you do have an interest in something that the products do offer, or there are features that you don't. Sometimes we have to fulfill those with other sets of capabilities. Tricia, I assume you'll be providing me with a nice link to both your demonstration and other things that we can showcase with clients who are actually in that IBM I environment that we can share. So this week, Randy, why don't we take another spin on the wheel of misfortune this week? What do you think?
Let's do it. So I will freely admit that I did not prepare anything for this week, specifically because I wanted to be able to just go roll the dice and kind of see what was out there. So let's see. Let's do dealer's choice. You guys want to look at data breaches, cyber attacks, or ransomware? We did ransomware last week, so let's pick one of the other two. Give me one to pick. So here's an interesting one that I heard something about this a couple of weeks ago, but this is apparently now kind of coming to the fore. So Landry's, which is a large restaurant and food service chain based out of Texas, the CEO is, a billionaire, and I think he owns the Houston Texans, or he owns one of the sports teams, Tillman Fertitta. So they had a massive data breach in 2015. They just settled on a $20 million payment for that breach. So another great example where, there's legal recourse for things like this when they happen. It's not always just a case of, mea culpa, sorry, we had a problem with the data breach, and we got over it, and we'll give you free data credit and data monitoring services for your, now there are legitimate legal and compliance and regulatory requirements that organizations have to submit to when they experience a breach like this. So, not only is it bad PR and operationally challenging and disruptive to your business, there's legal risk and legal liability involved. So this is just the latest example. There's a million of these, but this one's a pretty hefty one. And it also took a while for it to settle. Obviously, the breach occurred in 2015. So these things often, I think, get tied up in the court system for several years, but then eventually result in a non-trivial payout. Although I suppose you could argue for a company the size of Landry's, it's not a massive, contribution to their overall outflow of cash, but it's still a fair chunk of money. So another example of why data breaches are bad, and you should be doing everything humanly possible to mitigate and prevent against them. And if and when they do occur, make sure you're able to recover from them as quickly and seamlessly as possible.
Well, like you said, Randy, $20 million is the penalty. There's, if it was a ransom attack, right, and they have to pay, the ransom to get the data back. If it was a stolen identity thing, which in this particular case it is, right, you got to worry about reputation exposure. What is that going to do to my overall business? So $20 million, right, like you said, to Landry, is probably not a huge drop in the bucket, but who knows what then customers think of them, right?
Yeah, and interestingly, the crux of the issue was that they didn't implement two-step verification or two-factor authentication, which is, in 2015, admittedly, it wasn't as commonplace as it is now, but it was certainly available, right? So it would have been an easy fix or an easy thing for them to make a modest investment in implementing two-factor authentication, and they would have headed this off. So,
Trisha, you were going to say?
Yeah, how big of a impact is this having on these companies' reputations? Because this is becoming so commonplace. Are we starting to just say, another one, or is it making an impact?
That's a really interesting question. And I would argue, and I think you can see it in the news and the coverage of these events when they do occur. Back then, it was much less commonplace, right? So when something like this occurred, it was big news. It lived on for a while. It had legs. To your point, nowadays it's so common and happens on a daily basis, and we are becoming desensitized to it. I think every time it occurs, we just say, "Oh, another one." As long as it didn't affect me, I'm less concerned. If it did affect me, then what's my mitigation and what's my, remuneration? So it's a great question.
I think it's affecting more and more people. I mean, in the United States, we had people putting gasoline into trash bags to hoard it last week, right? With the pipeline situation. So
a lot of Darwin Awards handed out in the past couple of weeks, for sure.
Yeah. I think this is going to bring on increased regulation. It's going to bring on increased government requirements, because somehow this has to be, it's approaching the point where the criminality is literally affecting the entire countries, entire sets of people, entire economies, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, the federal government did come out last week with some new regulations about locking down information. I don't know how many folks saw it, and I don't know how if I'm going to be able to share it, but there was an executive order on improving the nation's cybersecurity, or White House executive mandate. So, I think you're right, Sean. Right? I think there's been, I think some people throw up their hands and said enough is enough, and they're gonna, we got to start taking some steps. Our customers our vendors have to start taking some steps to be able to mitigate these issues.
Yeah, and one of the ways you see this manifest is, GDPR has been around for, 4 or 5 years now. I lost track of time, but when GDPR was put into law, we here in the U.S. thought, oh, that's really extreme. We'll never do anything like that. They're going way too far with it. Well, fast forward to today, there's mounting pressure to implement a very GDPR-like set of compliance requirements here, if not even more strenuous. So it's going to happen. It will inevitably require that companies have much better, deeper, more reliable service policies and recovery policies and cyber threat prevention policies, which I suppose is good for IBM in the long haul, and good for us as well. But
it's good for me. I mean, putting gasoline in a trash bag is no fun.
Were you one of them, Sean?
It's getting it in the trash bag.
I hope you at least use like those heavy contractor bags. The 3 mil
getting it from the trash bag to the car that gets difficult, right, Sean?
Well, I mean, seriously, I mean, we're talking major infrastructure outages here. In my state, in the United States, we couldn't issue driver's licenses for 2 weeks. And I mean, the electricity grid is going to be next, right? And people aren't going to be happy when they have no electricity coming to their businesses and houses for weeks.
Yeah.
Trisha, you asked an interesting question, right? This is happening so much, right? What is reputation exposure cost? I'm doing a lot of work with a bunch of PII companies, personal identifiable information companies, and there's actually a whole gamut of vendors out there providing solutions to vendors who are collecting information on their customers to be able to lock that down in a more stringent way than they actually do just back up your data, right? It's really to kind of de-identify, provide the ability to de-identify data. But in doing some of the research that I've been doing, I asked that exact same question. What is the cost of reputation exposure? The claim is in North America in 1 year, it's over $500 million. Wow. Now, how does that translate across different businesses? But still, $500 million is what it costs businesses in North America for having a bad reputation with customers who buy their stuff, right?
Well, and that's one of the interesting dichotomies here, back to combining that with what Tricia said earlier. If you think about, some years ago when this was less common, when a cyber event or a data breach occurred, it would impact that company's bottom line. It would affect their stock value. It would drive down their market cap. I mean, it was a very significant in many cases, and there are plenty of examples of this. Nowadays, although they happen much more frequently, I think because they happen much more frequently, they have less of an impact and less of a long-lasting impact on the company's viability and financial performance, which you could argue maybe disincentivizes them to deal with it. Because if they're not exposed to that longer-term financial risk, they might be willing to, maybe Landry said, look, we can invest $100 million in our infrastructure and make sure this never happens again, or we can settle out of court for 20 million and be done with it. I mean, it sets up some interesting decisions that have to be made by these companies. So although I'm not always a fan of government overreach, I do think that levels of regulation are going to have to be changed, because otherwise organizations are not going to have the right responses and they're going to put consumers at risk.
I think your story is pretty interesting too, Randy. From when you talk about the history of this, I can remember, 15, 18 years ago working for Iron Mountain, a bunch of tapes got lost from Bank of America, right? So to your point, Bank of America has a huge hit on their stock price, et cetera, et cetera. They instantly turn around and blame Iron Mountain because Iron Mountain was transporting the tapes. Our stock took a hit, right, when I was at Iron Mountain. So it just kind of propagated itself. I don't see those types of things happening as frequently. I see the exposure happening. I don't see the kind of stock price hits that you've been talking about, which definitely used to happen as frequently.
Yeah. Yeah, unfortunately, as these things become more normalized, the risk profile is lessened, which again, I wonder about that. Like, I wonder what that does to the incentives for organizations to self-regulate in a sense, which they don't have a very high incentive right now. So.
Yeah. Team, I want to thank you all very much. I wasn't quite sure, and Randy, it's okay that you didn't prepare. I really like the last part of this conversation around these data breaches. Again, all pointing to the reason why we've got to have good data resilience in our environment. So, as we said, pay attention. Let's look for Trish's System I notes and video coming up. And in the weeks that follow, we will bring on our different business partners that help us solve new and unique challenges within the portfolio that can provide some value to you. So with that, I thank you all very much. Thank you.